And we are live. Hello, 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 and welcome to Arcana Unearthed. Today we're going to be looking at the latest update to the 2024 D&D Monk class. If you're new here, I'm Wayne Ingram. I'm a D&D enthusiast, full-time Dungeon Master, and Dungeon Master also for our actual play show here on Bardic Quest called Bardic Quest. So, yesterday, it was a very exciting day. Wizards of the Coast finally released details of the new monk class. After taking what seemed like a week off from class reveal videos, they gave us a little bit more information. And I will confess that the monk class is probably my least favourite of the D&D 2014 5th edition classes. It's less to do with the mechanics of the class, I must confess, rather than it being more about actually the fantasy of the monk. So if you're new to D&D generally, the monk class is separated from the others because it is the martial arts class, it is the prime athlete, it is the expert at hand-to-hand combat, shall we say. And that's cool, you know, if that's what you enjoy. It's just never been my jam. But perhaps now they might have enticed me in, and perhaps they might have enticed you in as well. So what we're going to do today on this video, like we have with all the others, we're going to go through some of the things that they announced yesterday with the monk class, and we're going to maybe on occasion take some comparisons to the 2014 class version of it. What's going to be particularly difficult this time around, though, is they've essentially said that the monk class is a complete overhaul, complete redesign. A lot of things might have the same name, but mechanically work very, very differently. So the monk's going to have a bit of a different feel this time around, which is somewhat quite exciting, but also makes it a little bit difficult to make direct comparisons. But we will see how we get on. So let's take a look at what we've got here. So obviously, as I say, they put out some details in this video here that they released yesterday, and also on D&D Beyond, this article, which gives a rundown of, crucially, what's changed. So as with all of these articles that they've put out, they're highlighting the things that have changed, the things that are new, not necessarily the things that have stayed the same. So until we actually see the full monk class, it's going to be very difficult to make precise judgment calls. We can only really comment on what's new and what's changed. But they've given us a breakdown of all of the things that the monk gets, which we will go to in detail as well, and then a little bit more detail on some of those too. So if we take a look at first level, you get the class feature martial arts, which if we actually compare it to the first level 2014, you get martial arts and unarmored defense previously. In terms of this, the martial arts thing, all simple melee weapons are now going to be considered monk's weapons. So in terms of proficiencies before that a monk got, in terms of proficiencies, it was simple weapons and short swords specifically. But they're also including martial melee weapons, which have the light property. So the simple melee weapons mostly remains the same, but now any martial melee weapons with the light property also are included. That will introduce a few new things. Obviously, the short sword, I think, has the light property. Ooh, blimey, now I'm being tested. I know the rapier certainly does, daggers and things like that short sword has a light property. Daggers and things like that. So it just opens up a few more weapons available to the monk. They are also changing things from, instead of, which we'll get to in a minute, in fact I'm jumping ahead, instead of key, they're changing it to focus, but that's something else entirely. So martial arts die, which you'll have to forgive me, as I say, the monk is not my favourite class, so some of the things I'm a little less familiar with than others, but the martial arts die, which was a D4, has now been changed to a D6 to start with and goes up to a D12. I can't quite recall the maximum that it was. This die changes as you gain in monks levels, as shown on the martial arts table, which was a D10. So they've basically promoted the martial arts die up a tier. So a nice buff for the monk, and not necessarily an unwarranted one. I think a lot of the reason why the monk is, and they've confessed this themselves, one of the less popular classes, I think one of the reasons is that it's mechanically not as potent, shall we say, as some of the other classes. Some of those things become obvious as we kind of go through some of these, what their intent was with those. Some things, maybe they went a little too far, possibly, I don't know, but they've obviously, their intention is to really spike the satisfaction of the monk class, and I think at the very least, if that is their brief, then I think they will have achieved that with these updates. So in terms of what else, you can now use your dexterity in place of strength when you use the grapple or shove actions. Now, this was one of the really interesting things that they really highlighted, because one of the major changes to the monk class is not necessarily a change to the monk class itself, rather than a change to unarmed strikes. Which obviously applies to all classes, not just the monk, but where the monk is interesting and how they've built it here is how the monk will then interact with that unarmed strike. So obviously we have a situation where weapon mastery has been introduced, which you can look at in my weapon mastery video that I did during the playtest, because it seems to have remained mostly the same. So weapon mastery has been introduced, which gives all of the martial classes lots of ways to add tactical elements to the weapons that they use. It unlocks special abilities that they can use anytime they land a hit with an attack. Where the monk perhaps is let down, and interestingly you'll note, as far as I can see anyway, there is no weapon mastery coming for the monk. But what they have done is they have taken the unarmed strike, they've taken the grapple rules and the shove action, and they've smushed it all together into the unarmed strike. So now when you use the unarmed strike, you actually get the option when you hit with it to either do damage as per the unarmed strike as it exists in 2014. You can instead choose to grapple, or you can instead choose to shove your opponent. And what's interesting about this, it's only a minor tweak, but it's also a significant tweak, because it actually has a wider impact. Where this has changed for things is, like with the grapple, for example, in 2014, if you take the grapple action, or if you take the attack action, you can use the grapple as a special sort of attack. Okay, it's kind of a little bit convoluted, which they've now simplified. But crucially, if as part of your action you get to make multiple attacks, then the grapple can only be used for one. Now they've changed that now, so that actually that can now be used for any attack you hit, just like with weapon mastery. So the grapple and the shove actions, and obviously the damage, then becomes very interesting when the monk can have multiple opportunities for unarmed strikes. And that's where it gets a little bit cinematic, this idea of the monk kind of moving around the battlefield, shoving one person, grappling another, hitting them, pushing them away, and things like that, and the fluidity of that, which I think is a really nice design choice and really interesting for what they're going for. But also what that means is these interactions with the grapple and shove actions then become quite interesting, because again, the monk will have multiple opportunities to use these every single round if they want to. So in a way, and this is how Todd Kenrick put it in the video that they released on YouTube yesterday, in a way, unarmed strike itself has been weapon masteried, but everybody has the weapon mastery features of unarmed strike, if you will. But interesting that, given the fact that monks still have proficiency in some of these weapons, as we mentioned, they haven't been given the benefit of a weapon mastery even for these particular weapons, which I think is an interesting choice. But I feel as though the monk will make up for that in other ways, as we'll come to in a moment. So that's the changes to level 1. Presumably unarmored defense remains there. I don't think they're taking that away. I don't recall them mentioning that they're taking away. So unarmored defense presumably is going to be in place, but we won't know that until they publish the player's handbook and the class in full. So when we get to level 2 here, we have Monk's Focus. In fact, let me go over the martial arts bit as they cover it down here. So the biggest change, the dice are one side larger. Monk's weapons have been simplified, as we said. So martial melee weapons with the light property all qualify. You can use dex instead of strength. Yeah, okay, cool. Covered that. So, at level 2, we get some interesting things. We get Monk's Focus and Uncanny Metabolism. So, Monk's Focus, it's a new name for the feature where you would find Flurry of Blows, Patient Defense, and Step of the Wind. They've kind of all been smooshed together. So, this is an interesting thing here now, where you unlock, instead of key points, you're now unlocking what they call focus points. Not entirely sure what the justification was for the change. I'm guessing it's got something to do with appropriation, perhaps. I don't know, and I don't really want to get into it too much. But I like the new name, focus points. And also, I find key points being one of those things that people never really can decide how to pronounce it. So I think focus points is nice. So they've smushed all of these features together. You now get focus points instead of key points, but they function exactly the same way. So what's interesting here is every single one of these abilities, Flurry of Blows, Patient Defense, and Step of the Wind, they've structured it now so that every one of those features has something that you can do without having to spend any focus points. So again, this idea of the monk being the premier athlete gets to unlock these various things. So Patient Defense allows you to use the disengage action as a bonus action without having to spend any focus points. However, if you do decide to spend a focus point, you can upgrade the Patient Defense so that you can use the disengage and the dodge action, not just as a bonus action, but actually as the same bonus action. So you are disengaging and dodging at the same time as you move forward. Presumably move forward. With Step of the Wind, which also required the use of key points, now it allows you to dash as a bonus action for free. So now as a monk, you get to disengage and or dash as a bonus action. No questions asked. But if you then do spend a focus point, then you're able to disengage and dash as part of the same bonus action, which Step of the Wind now becomes incredibly powerful for maneuvering around the battlefield. Essentially, a monk with use of a focus point can now move around the battlefield without having to worry necessarily about attacks of opportunity. And they can move at full speed as a bonus action while still having the opportunity to attack. Now, Step of the Wind also, the other thing is that it also doubles your jump distance for a turn. So you can actually then use that focus point with Step of the Wind to leap further, should you be fleeing. They've not really mentioned here in Flurry of Blows in this point, and I'm struggling to recall exactly what the change was. But Flurry of Blows, I think you already... I'm trying to remember now. Interesting that they've not put it in here. If memory serves from the video, you already had the access to the Unarmed Strike. I think Flurry of Blows, if I recall, gave you access to a couple of new... a couple of extra ones. Let me take a look at Flurry of Blows as it exists in 2014, see if that jogs my memory. Immediately after you take an attack action on your turn, you can spend a focus point to make 2 unarmed strikes as a bonus action. I can't quite remember what they said about Flurry of Blows here. I don't know why they didn't put it in the article. Interesting. No, I can't remember. That's annoying. So Uncanny Metabolism, which is the other feature that you now get at level 2, allows you to then regain all of your focused points when you roll initiative. This is a once per long rest thing, and I'm glad they added that caveat, because I thought, my god, This sounds very powerful for a level 2 feature. But once per day, essentially, you can restore all of your focus points once per long rest. You also then regain hit points equal to your monk's level plus a roll of the martial arts die, which is this level would be a d6. So starting at level 2, you have the potential to increase your hit points once per day by 8, between 3 and 8. And then obviously that will increase per level, and obviously getting to bring back your focus points, which, presuming they remain the same as the 2014 Player's Handbook, at level 2 you'll be starting with 2. So that gives you a maximum of 4 every day, which is not necessarily bad because you've got a lot of uses for your key points, but also obviously with Monk's Focus and the rehash of that gives you a lot of things to play around with. Hi Becky, nice to see you joining us in the chat. I thought you'd be interested in this one, given that you are playing in Shattered Obelisk on Monday nights. So yeah, it's very interesting. So just seeing what you're saying, Becky. Yes, key points for 2 unarmed strikes as a bonus action. Yes, thank you. I thought that was the case. Metabolism is going to be cool if they still allow focus points to be restored when short resting, or if this is replacing it outright. I would imagine they're probably going to replace it outright. I mean, it'd be interesting if they don't, but I imagine they might. Yes, thanks for joining us, Becky. Good to have you in the chat. So next at level 3, we have Deflect Attacks, which was formerly Detect Missiles, which you did also get at level 3. So it's still very much the same feature in that the narrative idea is the same, that you are deflecting attacks, except it's now much more usable. It's actually not just limited to ranged weapon attacks. Instead now, any attack or anything that allows you to reduce... anything that includes bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage that is headed your way, you can reduce that damage. Now, they've tried to simplify deflect attacks because it was a little bit convoluted as it was before, so they've attempted to simplify it here. I still find it a little bit complicated to get my head around, but I think it's better. So when this attack comes your way, whether it's bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing, again, it's not necessarily just range, it could be a melee attack as well, you can reduce the damage by 1d10 plus your dexterity modifier and monk level. And if you reduce that damage then to 0, you can use a focus point to then redirect the attack. So then what happens is, if the attack was melee or ranged, it changes where you can send the attack back to. If it's melee, obviously within 5 feet, or if it's ranged, you've got up to 60 feet. And then you force them to make a saving throw against the damage based on the martial arts die and your dexterity modifier. So the damage comes from it's a d6 presumably from the martial arts die plus your dexterity modifier. That's how I understand it to function. Again, until we actually read how it's written, it's not as clear as perhaps they'd like it to be. It still feels a little bit convoluted. But from my understanding, what they're saying here is any attack can be reduced. Any attack. And it looks to me as though, and I'm going to scroll up here just to make sure that I've got this right, there is no limit to how many times you can do this. That's my understanding of what they've written here. Again, until we see the fully written class, that seems to be my understanding of it. which for a 3rd level ability seems pretty strong. Now, bearing in mind you're not necessarily reducing the damage to 0 and negating the attack, but you are reducing the damage down, and if you reduce it to 0, you can then use a focus point to redirect the attack. So, very cool there. I like it. Becky's saying, it's cool, makes up for only regaining focus points once per long rest or initiative roll per day. Not entirely sure that's what that's referring to. It might be deflect attack. But anyway, so we now have the subclasses, and this is actually the point at which they got me really rather excited. Because, as I said at the top of the video, the monk is not my favourite class, mainly because I don't particularly like the fantasy of it. I'm not going to go into too much detail here on the subclasses. Most of these are rehashed. In fact, I think all of them are rehashed subclasses. But I like the themes of them. So you have the Warrior of Mercy, which is the mixture of light and dark. You have the Radiance, and also the Shadow or the Necrotic. So the Hand of Harm and Implements of Mercy are coming back, apparently with some minor tweaks. The Hand of Healing will now be classed as a magic action, which is a new type of action that they're introducing into the 2024 rules, just to improve clarity. And the most significant change to this subclass is that Flurry of Healing and Harm will be able to be used a number of times per long rest equal to your Wisdom modifier. This is a subclass that first appeared in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, so it's a minor tweaks, minor improvements. The Warrior of Shadow has been reworked, so Warrior of Shadow can cast Darkness and Minor Illusion, and you can move that field of darkness around, but importantly, and actually this is quite crucial, as somebody who's played a Shadow Sorcerer, and I used to cast Darkness all the time, the Warrior of Shadow, which replaces the Way of the Shadow, they've renamed the subclasses, now you'll have Dark Vision that allows you to see through your darkness, which is very, very crucial, because Darkness is a particularly powerful spell for controlling the battlefield, but it can actually be quite difficult if you yourself as the caster can't see it. They're also going to be improved Shadow Step, which allows you to spend a focus point to ignore the dim or darkness restriction of Shadow Step. So Shadow Step being where you can move into or out into dim light or darkness, kind of like a teleport, like a Misty Step. But what they're doing now is if you spend a focus point now, you don't have to move either into dim light or darkness. You can move just into bright light. And then you can make an unarmed strike immediately after as part of that same bonus action. Cloak of Shadow at level 17 will allow you to wreathe yourself in shadows for 1 minute or until you're incapacitated or you end your turn in bright light, which basically makes you invisible until you attack or cast a spell. And you can actually, whilst you're in that Cloak of Shadow, you can move through occupied spaces like difficult terrain, kind of almost like semi-incorporeal, and then use Flurry of Blows without needing any focus points. Warrior of Elements. The main real change here, as far as I could see in the video, is that whereas the Way of the Four Elements, which this replaces, if I remember rightly, you had to kind of focus in on one particular elemental damage type, whereas now thematically they're changing it so that actually it's all four of them all at the same time. Again, I'm not so familiar with the monk class. It's one that I'm less familiar with, but I believe that is the case with the four elements, that you choose an element, or at least at different points you choose elements. I'm trying to recall. But now you are basically able to extend your reach to 10 foot, dealing your choice of acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage. And you can also pull or push targets 10 feet if they fail save against that. You also get the Elementalist cantrip, which is a new cantrip, which will give you the ability to create an area effect elemental burst to kind of create a bit of a flow. This is much more a sort of like controlling the battlefield rather than moving around it subclass. This is much more about controlling the enemies around you. And then you have the Warrior of the Open Hand, which is kind of the fundamental monk subclass. What's the phrase I'm looking for? No, it's gone. But it's mostly unchanged. They are able to, with the exception of one of its options, only blocking opportunity attacks rather than all reactions. So it's one of the few things that they've said that they have nerfed a little bit, which I think is fair because, as you'll see as we go through, they've given a lot of extra stuff to the monk. This is one of the things that they've toned down a little bit. So now the blocking is only on opportunity attacks, not on reactions. Wholeness of body has been moved to a bonus action and now heals a number of hit points equal to a roll of your martial arts die plus your wisdom modifier rather than 3 times your monk level. This is a design change that we've seen a lot where they stop moving. They've placed things on other resources rather than on your monk's level. One of the things that we've seen often is proficiency modifier instead. I think the purpose behind that is that it's something that you reference all the time, doesn't require as big a calculation, and also probably gives cleaner numbers as well, I would have thought, without requirements for rounding and things like that. I don't know. However, you can now use it a number of times equal to your wisdom modifier per long rest rather than once, so you do get more uses out of it. The new fleet step feature allows you to use Step of the Wind as part of any bonus action that wasn't already used to perform Step of the Wind. Hang on, let me think about that. The new fleet step feature allows you to use Step of the Wind as part of any bonus action that wasn't already used to perform Step of the Wind. Okay, so if, for example, you used... let me think. If you used Flurry of Blows, for example, you could then use Step of the Wind. I'm not quite sure of that, actually. That's a little bit unclear with how they've written that, because that kind of sounds like you're getting a free bonus action, but I'm guessing not. I'd like them to clarify that a little bit. It now costs 4 focus points and does 10 d12 force damage, Quivering Palm this is, which is a lot, on a failed save, rather than reducing the target to 0 hit points and half as much on a successful save. And I believe that was one of those things that they also tweaked to make a little less potent. Okay, let's have a look at a few more things. By the way, if you have made it this far, please do me a favour and hit that like button for me. That really does help the YouTube algorithm gods to put this out to more and more folks. So, at level 5, now we get some more juicy stuff. Stunning Strike. Now, this is one of the things that I am glad that they have nerfed. From a Dungeon Master's perspective, they have nerfed this a fair amount, because Stunning Strike could easily be abused if it got out of hand and if it was played optimally. I say abused, it's all within the rules, so it's not actually being abused. That's probably a poor choice of words, but can make the Dungeon Master's life very, very difficult, let's put it that way. So it's been rebalanced. So now it allows you to use a monk weapon or an unarmed strike. Now again, Stunning Strike here. We're looking at... let's compare the two directly. You can interfere with the flow of ki in an opponent's body. When you hit another creature with a melee weapon attack, you can spend 1 ki point to attempt a Stunning Strike. The target must succeed on a Constitution saving throw or be stunned until the end of your next turn. So now they've specified that it does have to be a monk weapon or an unarmed strike, so something you're proficient with, essentially. It's an interesting choice, because I very rarely see players attack with things that they're not proficient in, or that is not optimal. But interesting that they've called that out. If successfully applied, the stun condition now ends at the start of your next turn rather than the end, and it can only be used once per turn. That's crucial here, because Stunning Strike got to the point where it could just be so stacked that it become it became problematic for encounters and encounter balance, because the stun condition is a very powerful condition. It can really render people pretty useless. So it's good to see that it has been now reduced in power a little bit, just so that things are a little bit in balance. But again, I don't think anybody's going to be too unhappy with that unless their build relies on Stunning Strike. And again, you don't have to move over to this version of the class anyway. So I can't really see many people getting too upset by this, given the amount of goodies that you're being given in its place. However, if the target does succeed on their saving throw against Stunning Strike, their speed is halved until the start of your next turn, and the next attack made against them is done so with advantage. So I think this is designed to kind of temper the disappointment if Stunning Strike, which you're now limited to once per turn, I think it's there to temper the disappointment, so that either way, when you use your Stunning Strike, then you... once you've used it, you're going to get something out of it either way. Now, interestingly here, they haven't stated whether it still requires a focus point. I presume it does. But I don't think they have specified. Let me have a look at the table. Yeah, they haven't specified one way or another whether it still requires a focus point. So again, we won't necessarily know that until we see the final class. I wouldn't be surprised either way. I think possibly it should still require a focus point, but because of the limitation of once per turn, I don't know if that's going to be quite so problematic if that's not the case. So then we also have Empowered Strike, which is a new version of Key Empowered Strike. You can change the damage type of your Unarmed Strike to Force damage, so that you can bypass some resistances. In terms of the Key Empowered Strikes, how that changed was that your Unarmed Strikes previously then counted as magical for the purposes of overcoming resistance and immunity to non-magical attacks and damage. I suppose they've changed it to Force damage because Force damage is magical energy anyway, so Force damage would count as a magical attack. So I think it's just actually improving it to make it more appropriate to various things, because whereas Key Empowered Strike would allow you to bypass resistances against non-magical attacks, specifically if you were fighting against something that I'm trying to think now. Basically, it just opens up more resistances for you to bypass. I was trying to think of some specific examples, but the point is more resistances. Becky very happy with the speed reduction and advantage. I assume advantage is given to allies and not just the monks. Yes, Becky, in relation to the Stunning Strike. The next attack, at least how it's written here, the next attack made against them is done so with advantage. So you're giving advantage to your fellow party members here. It's the very next attack, whether that be you or another player character. So then we skip over through up to level 10 because we get a few subclass features and the like. So at level 10 we get Heightened Focus, which is a new level 10 feature that is going to basically improve the core mechanics of the monk class. So first, Flurry of Blows is going to give you an additional attack, bringing the total up to 3 per bonus action. Then your Patient Defense will grant you temporary HP based on 2 rolls of your martial arts die. So that will be, not 2d6 at level 10. It would be, presumably, at level 10, you're going to be looking at what would have been a d6, so presumably a d8, so 2d8 up to 16 HP, I presume, but again, until we see the fully published class, that will remain a little bit unclear for now. But gaining temporary hit points when you use Patient Defense. So Patient Defense, just to clarify here, so if you use your key point for Patient Defense, you will be able to do the disengage, and dodge, and also gain temporary hit points. Very nice. And then finally, when you use Step of the Wind, you can move one willing creature that is large or smaller along with you until the end of your next turn, and they don't provoke opportunity attacks as they do. So when they say you can move one willing creature specifically, so this is an ally, so you just grab them and drag them across the battlefield, which sounds like a lot of fun. Provided, of course, they are willing. So then at level 10 you get Self-Restoration, another new level 10 feature, which lets you avoid levels of exhaustion that you would normally accumulate when going without food or water. And at the end of your turn you can end the charmed, frightened, or poisoned condition. Now, I'm interested to see what they do with exhaustion, because they haven't clarified one way or the other. They were playtesting changing exhaustion. I kind of hope that they don't. But this idea of the monk at level 10 not needing any form of sustenance, for a level 10 feature I don't mind so much, because by level 10 wizards and things have access to teleportation and things like that, so travel tends to be less of an issue at level 10. So at a level 10 feature, I think that's fair. I'm not going to get my knickers in a twist too much about that. I like my exhaustion, I like my wilderness travel, and I like those sorts of things, but I think level 10 is a perfectly appropriate level for those things to not really matter anymore, so I don't have any issues with that. And equally, the charmed, frightened, or poison conditions, being able to end those at the end of your turn, I don't mind either. If it was at the start of your turn, maybe I'd be a little bit more annoyed, but the frightened condition at the end of your turn, you're still going to have to go through a turn where you are frightened, charmed, or poisoned. So you're going to have a turn where you've got those in place, but then at the end of it, you go, okay, you've had your one turn, now it's my turn, kind of thing, for a bit of payback. So I like that. It's a pretty cool feature. What does that replace at level 10? Purity of Body. Does it replace it? Makes you immune to disease and poison. I'm wondering if Purity of Body might be replaced by Self-Restoration here. Because as somebody pointed out in the comments for the last video, all diseases, or at least most of the diseases, will now have the poison condition built into them. So, and when in those instances when the poison condition is removed, the disease also ends. So I guess with the ability to remove the poison condition from yourself, Purity of Body will now no longer be a feature, I would have thought. So then we hop on over to level 13, where you get Deflect Energy. Now this takes the limitations of Deflect attacks, where it's bludgeoning, slashing, or piercing damage, and now any attack of any damage type can be reduced in damage and deflected as well. So if a wizard blasts you with some, I don't know, a firebolt, you can ping that back. Which I think is really cool. And again, this kind of fantasy of the monk has kind of been a bit meh for me personally, but now when we're getting into these high levels, we're getting into some really cool cinematic stuff, which I'm really actually quite enjoying, and it may perhaps win me over on the monk, and it maybe perhaps win a few other people over too. Let's see, I suppose. So then we have Perfect Focus at level 15, which is a new feature as well. Is it a new feature? Oh no, yes, that was Perfect Self down there. Perfect Focus. So when you roll initiative, if you're below 4 focus points and you haven't used Uncanny Metabolism, just instantly you regain enough focus points to bring you back up to 4. So that happens when you roll initiative, just instantly. So long as you haven't used Uncanny Metabolism, which Uncanny Metabolism was limited to... Where's it gone? Once per long rest. So long as you haven't used, or you don't use Uncanny Metabolism... Can you have not used it all day, or is it just so long as you don't use it in that encounter? That would I would like some clarification on that, please, Wizards of the Coast. From the sounds of things, when you roll initiative, you're below 4 hit, and you don't use, so not that you haven't, that you don't. So that sounds as though, obviously the two can't stack, but it's only for that encounter, that limitation. You immediately gain enough focus points to bring you back up to 4. Very, very nice. So there's a lot of ways with Uncanny Metabolism and Perfect Focus, you're able to really increase your focus dice for the day, which is pretty sweet. Alright, so let's have a look at the next few. So Superior Defense at level 18, which at level 18 you got Empty Body and Unarmed Movement. I don't think these are being replaced, but that's not necessarily clear. But at the start of your turn, you can expend 3 focus points to regain resistance to all damage types, except for force, for 1 minute or until you're incapacitated. So at the start of your turn, spend 3 focus points and now you're resistant to everything for 10 rounds. It's ideal when you're up against high level enemies that are pummeling you with elemental damage, like ancient dragons and fire giants and things like that. So very, very simple feature. Just spend some key points and gain resistance to everything except for force. Now it'll be interesting to know whether or not it replaces either of these. Unarmed Movement gives an unarmored speed bonus, which increases by 30 feet. That's the 2014 Player's Handbook. Or with Empty Body, you can spend 4 key points to become invisible for a minute. Okay. I think this is going to replace Empty Body, because whilst you're invisible, you have resistance to all damage except for force damage. So I think this is going to replace Empty Body. Now, interestingly, that means that you're going to probably lose the Astral Projection spell, which is a shame because it's a cool thematic thing. But also, how helpful is it? I don't know. I quite like Empty Body as a feature. I don't know. Superior Defense, though, it's been nerfed a little bit, but I think it's just as useful, and also the key point or the focus point fee, if you will, is less. So fair enough, I think, personally. So finally then, at level 19, you get your epic boon. Well, not quite finally, there's level 20 as well, but at level 19 you get your epic boon, which every class gets an epic boon at level 19. It's a special feat that is specifically for levels 19 and above. And each class is going to have a recommended epic boon. So there's going to be 12 epic boons in the Player's Handbook for you to choose from. And each one is built for a particular class. So the recommended epic boon, although you can choose any of them, will be the Boon of Irresistible Offense. First, you get to increase your strength or dex ability score by 1 up to a maximum of 30, so going above and beyond the 20 maximum. Bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage you deal will always ignore resistance, so that's cool. And additionally, when you roll a 20 on an attack roll, you can deal additional damage equal to the ability score you increased with this feat, the ability score. So when you crit, you get your additional critical hit damage, so your additional dice, plus then your proficiency and modifiers, etc., plus on top of that your actual ability score, which could be an additional 30 damage. So your critical hits as a monk suddenly become very powerful indeed. I like that. I think that's a nice epic boon to throw in. So Body and Mind at level 20, which replaces Perfect Self, because Perfect Self actually is very, very similar to the Perfect Focus, which they've brought down from level 20 to level 15. So Body and Mind instead is a new capstone feature for the monk, and at level 20 you get to increase your dexterity and wisdom scores by 4 each, up to a maximum of 25. So a +4 is very, very good. Okay, so Becky's saying, sounds like monks only have 4 points. I think they are currently linked or to level or some stats. So this is, I presume, you're referring to focus points here. Currently, in terms of key points, no, I don't think you're limited to 4 points. Currently, it is linked to level to a degree. In fact, it looks as though, yes, they are linked to level. So the amount of key points is equal to your level. I presume that focus points is going to function the same way. So, of course, having perfect focus, for example, you're not going to get all of them back. You would have 15, but if you have less than 4, if you've used a lot that day, you can use perfect focus to bring them back up. And equally, in terms of uncanny metabolism, you get to regain all of your expended focus points when you roll initiative once per long rest. So your uncanny metabolism you can use right to the midnight hour, and then once you've run out of that, you still have the option then for perfect focus, if that makes sense. So that really is much of it for the 2024 monk. As I say, the monk has never been my favourite class. I've never particularly been a huge fan of the fantasy of it, but I really like where they're going with this. I'm actually really starting to see the fantasy play out on the battlefield, because the monk now feels much more dynamic around the battlefield. And I think what's going to be interesting to see with the 2024 rules is actually how the dynamic of the battlefield changes. I think that's going to be really interesting to see, because I feel as though a lot of things are getting a big buff, and it feels as though there's a lot more design intent around moving the battlefield around. One of the criticisms of 5th edition combat is side A approaches side B, they stare each other down and they move towards each other, and then they stay there, and then they just keep hitting each other until one of them dies. That is one of the common criticisms of 5th edition combat, and it feels as though a lot of the design intent is for the classes to be able to move around a lot, and also to control the battlefield and fling things off and throw things around and things like that, which is very, very welcome. I'm hoping that the Dungeon Masters get similar sorts of goodies when the Monster Manual comes out, but that will remain to be seen. But I'm hoping that they take a few cues from perhaps people like Matt Colville and MCDM in Flea Mortals, and having a lot more of that kind of dynamic battlefield, which I think will make combat feel faster, even though it might not necessarily be, but it will feel faster and it will give more people things to do. And the monk really feels representative of that sort of design intent, which makes the monk feel very, very exciting, as they are literally flying around the battlefield, just like thwacking people, hitting that person, moving to that one, hitting them, grappling them, kicking them, punching them in the face, throwing them away. Like, it feels very dynamic, and I can kind of see the fantasy playing out as the martial artist, which makes it feel much more present. And then you throw in some of the subclasses as well on top of that. None of the subclasses being particularly new, but some of them being brought into the core rules, such as the one that's the Shadowfell, the Warrior of the Shadows, for example, and also the Warrior of... I can't remember what it was called. The Warrior of Mercy, which is the combination of Radiant and Necrotic kind of fusing together. And these kind of subclasses kind of coming in really helps for the monk to feel more magical and less just limited to martial arts and discipline, which is kind of the box that I have always, in my head, placed the monk into, which is probably not fair on the monk. But welcome to see some of these things flying into the core rules now and being promoted and pushed. All in all, I feel like the monk class is really nicely improved. I'm actually really quite happy with it from the perspective of a player. I am a little bit worried from a Dungeon Master's perspective. We haven't really seen what all the toys that Dungeon Masters are going to get in the Monster Manual. They have said that they're massively redesigning things, but I'm a little bit concerned that the player characters are just getting more and more powerful with more and more dynamic abilities. and that monsters might get left behind. But that being said, with some of the more inventive design choices that we've seen in some of the later monster books and additions to the bestiaries in various adventures, I'm feeling pretty confident, actually, that they've kind of tightened up how they design monsters and made them more interesting. So it just feels as though, for me, combat in 5th edition, and I think the monk is really the one that makes this very, very clear. Plus, when you combine in weapon mastery from the other classes as well, it feels as though combat is going to get much more dynamic. So I'm really, really a fan of this monk class, actually. It's been massively souped up in strength, but provided that Dungeon Masters get similar sorts of goodies to make combat dynamic as well, I can't see any particular problems with this. But we will see. We will see. So, we have just had a subscriber. Thank you, Christian, for subscribing. And thank you for tuning in. I'm going to wrap it up there because my partner is calling me. So I will wrap it up there and leave you to it. So thank you very much for tuning in. And I'll see you for the next video, probably around the same time next week.